Well, as part of Wellness Week at Kimpton Grand Roatan Resort, one of the guests is Steve Elkins. You may not know Steve, but Steve is pretty well known when it comes to Roatan and Honduras because of some work that he did in the Mosquitia, basically discovering a hidden village or a kingdom that has long since passed. I'll let you go into it, Steve. Let's drop the listeners into the jungle. When did you know that you found something extraordinary?
Well, it actually is quite a while ago. When I started my search in 1994, believe it or not, I was a young man then. I even had some hair. And I had heard the legends of Ciudad Blanca, Lost City, the Monkey God, and so on and so forth. And I was actually working in television and thought it would make a great documentary if we could find it or at least find out what was going on. So I mounted an expedition along with some people who were currently looking for it at the time. And we went out there and actually, after a couple weeks of slogging through the jungle, came upon this big boulder next to a river. And it had a wonderful petroglyph, a rock carving of a man with a mask or a headdress on. And he had a stick and he had a bag that looked like seeds falling out of it. And there was an archaeologist with us. And he said, "Oh, this must be a farmer." And I went, "Well, I don't know if I believe that because I can't see 20 feet in front of me. The jungle's so thick." But we argued about it, and some people thought it was a shaman doing a ceremony. I don't know. But anyway, all I knew is that this kind of a sophisticated rock carving doesn't exist in isolation. So there must have been something going on in this area that people didn't know about. And at that moment, I became, for whatever reasons, obsessed with trying to figure out, was this legend true or was it not? And that's when it all started for me. And I spent the next 20 some odd years following up every lead I could, doing expeditions, and finally using new technology to try and solve this mystery.
Okay, for those who aren't familiar, what's the myth behind the city of the monkey god? Why for so many years did it capture the imagination? I mean, was it like a story like El Dorado that had been around and floating around and everybody was like, yeah, it's just a story? Or how much skepticism was put into it before you actually felt like pursuing it?
Well, it's like all these stories. For some reason, people like stories of lost cities and treasure and all that kind of stuff. It appeals to most people. And it's been floating around since 1526 when the conquistador Cortez first came to Honduras. And he heard about this legendary lost city full of riches out somewhere in what's now called Mosquitia. And I don't know if that really existed or maybe the local people told him that to get rid of him. I don't know. But he went looking and he couldn't find it. And then he wrote a letter to the King of Spain explaining that there's this fabulous riches in this lost civilization in the jungle. And that started it, way before all of us were around. And at the same time, the local indigenous people also have their legends, and they're not necessarily the lost city of the monkey god. They have many different names. The Spanish called it Ciudad Blanca because apparently the buildings were made out of a whitish stone, which makes sense because it's carbonate rock, which is kind of gray-white. And then there's other names that I can't pronounce, but they all had a lot of similarities to it. And that's how it started. So it's been a mystery, and it's actually been known in Honduras for a very long time. It's sort of an iconic myth or legend.
Okay, the technology that enabled this was something called LIDAR or LIDAR, depending on who's pronouncing it. And this wasn't your machete and map expedition. How did this airborne laser technology come about? When was the data revealed to you that said, oh, wait, there's actually something under all of that canopy?
Well, first I want to briefly explain. I did the old machete and old school way of doing it a number of times in the 90s. And I did find a few things, but nothing that really could nail it. And then around 2010, I heard about an evolution of this technology called LIDAR, which uses pulsed laser beams from an aircraft, kind of like radar or sonar, but you're using laser beams. And it sends these beams down to the earth. They bounce off whatever's there, and they send it back to the plane. And the computer is able to create a model in 3D of what the terrain is like. And depending on how good your LiDAR is and how thick the jungle is and so on and so forth, you can get very high resolution. So you can actually model the little bumps and lumps in the ground. You can get rid of all the vegetation digitally and see the little perturbations of the ground. And if you see something that's square or round or looks like a pyramid or whatever, it's very suspect. And you go, this is probably man-made. So this is how it worked. I spent a lot of years doing it, many different methodologies, from satellite imagery to being boots on the ground. And they all gave me a little bit of info, but never nailed it. This LIDAR was fantastic, and everyone's using it now. It's sort of the technology du jour to find ancient civilizations buried under jungles, because it works so well.
How harsh was the environment once you got your boots on the ground, and what toll did it take on your team physically and mentally?
Well, the Mosquitia jungle, in its current form, and particularly 15, 20 years ago, it was an extremely rough jungle. In the words of many people that I dealt with that worked in jungles, from special forces, jungle warfare guys, to other explorers, the Mosquitia is considered one of the toughest jungles in the world. It's got 50-meter triple canopy, meaning there's 3 layers of vegetation. When you look at it from an airplane, it's like looking at the crown of a piece of broccoli. You can't see anything through it. And it's really tough to find anything. So that's why the LIDAR works so good. And when we actually went there underground, it was very tough. Obviously we survived, but unfortunately, there's a particular parasite that thrives in this valley that we found and we went into, called leishmaniasis. And you get it from the bite of a sandfly. It's not unknown to the world. We knew that there was possibility, but we didn't know to what degree it was so prevalent. And about 60% of all the people that went with me got infected and still suffer from it today. You have it for life once you get it. It's not a very nasty disease.
This is a flesh-eating type bacteria.
Well, it's not. People often describe it that way. I guess they watch too many of these movies. But what it does is, it's actually a protozoan, which is a one-celled animal, and it lives in the gut of a certain species of female sandfly, which I guess they had a lot of them, this one particular area of Mosquitia. And when the sandfly goes to take blood from you like a mosquito, the little one-celled organism goes through the proboscis and into your bloodstream, and it turns out that it needs your white blood cells to replicate. So it attacks the white blood cells. The white blood cells can't really defend you against it. And you start out with 1, then you got 10, then you got 20, then you got 100. And your immune system goes, hey, what's happening here? We can't seem to get rid of these guys. And it sends out more and more white blood cells, and your immune system goes haywire. And it actually starts eating yourself. Your immune system starts destroying your own tissues. So the actual organism is not eating you, it's your own body eating you. The organism is causing your immune system to attack yourself.
I think that's even worse.
It is, when you think about it.
All right. So the discovery itself, what exactly did you uncover? Was it truly a lost city or something more complex?
Well, cities are defined different ways by archaeologists. A lot in the popular thing, we think a city like Manhattan or Chicago or Tegucigalpa in Honduras. So it's not as big as that, but it's big for the thousands of years ago when it was thriving. And so it had a pyramid, it had plazas, it had houses, it had farm terraces, roadways, so on and so forth, and probably much more than we actually have uncovered so far. So in terms of archaeological terms, it is a city. It had a large population, it existed for a long time, and it had all the things that archaeologists and anthropologists use to classify something as a city. It was not a little hamlet. It was a major population center for the time.
What kind of features stopped you and said, hey, you've got something that changes everything we know about history at that time? Because until people discovered it, it was just a rumor.
Right. Well, what we found was things that you would think you would find. We found a pyramid, and we found a ramp that goes down the pyramid and leads into a big central plaza, very similar to many other sites in Central America. So the architecturally was kind of the same. Now, when we were fortunate, and because the place had been, I guess no one had really gone there for centuries, there was, so far we've uncovered, or the archaeologists are working there, over 600 carved stone objects, anthropomorphic objects. They're like a weird jaguar, half human, half jaguar, all kinds of animal figures, and even at first was thought to be decorative carvings. Turns out now, according to the anthropologists from Honduras that have been studying it, it's likely an early form of Olmec writing. That's their hypothesis based on what it is. It was all these strange symbols that would be around us like a table or something, or on the legs of different objects, and it didn't really seem to make sense. However, the objects, the carvings, were separated generally by double parallel lines, which is something the Maya did to separate their glyphs when they're telling a story. When I first saw it, to me, I immediately thought it was not decorative. This is a storyboard, like in the movie business. And I think that's what it's going to turn out to be. So now they're trying to figure out, what does it say? Maybe it says made in China. I don't know.
How long have they been working on this now? Because you initially went in with the LIDAR when? What year?
2012 is when we did the LIDAR.
And then 2 years later, you
No, three
were
years
able to.
later, in
3 years later.
2014, we launched,
Right.
launched a ground expedition, which was really a helicopter, expedition, along with the assistance of the Honduran government. Yeah.
How many people were part of the expedition at the time?
Well, my team, on the ground team, when we went there the first time, there was probably about 20 of us, 21. I don't remember exactly. Then the Hondurans sent some of their own archaeologists, anthropologists, and a bunch of special forces soldiers. So it was quite a few people initially.
So, just because I know people are always interested in this stuff, were there like whispers of curses or ancient gods, or you're not supposed to be here, anything along those lines? Because, I know that going back a previous century, when they discovered the Great Pyramids and the smaller pyramid rooms, and were able to walk into these places, and there was these people like to protect themselves by oaths and incantations. Was there anything like that you guys found?
Well, there certainly was plenty of those stories in the legends. There's a number of legends of strange things going on. Personally, I didn't notice anything strange, but I could see how people could think those things. One of my favorite legends, well, of course, they have the legend of the monkey god. There was a legend that they worshipped the monkey god and they did all these ceremonies. Well, that makes sense to me because I've been in many jungle areas around the world, and in prior times, people worship different animal gods. So there's plenty of monkeys there, so why not a monkey? Okay? One of the stranger things is they had a superstition or a story about a creature called a ulak, U-L-A-K. Now, the ulak was supposed to be sort of human, but very hairy, like completely hirsute, covered in hair, and his legs pointed backwards. And it was a male. And they would say that he would come into the villages at night and try and steal the young women. So the young women better stick around, not wander around. Now, it sounds very fanciful, but I did some research recently, and I found out there are some very unfortunate people that are born with two flaws. One is they're completely hairy, like an animal. I mean, you can go on Google and you can find, young kids that completely covered in hair. All right, it's not so unusual. And then there's also another genetic defect where people are born with their lower legs or their feet backwards. And now they have some surgical techniques when they're young and they can reverse it. But I remember seeing a clip of a poor woman in China that had it, and she didn't have the surgery. It was a while ago, and she walked around with this very strange gait because her feet were going backwards. She almost had to walk on all fours. So maybe it started, there was some very unfortunate person that was born with both of these problems, and it obviously would scare people, and the person would be rejected, and the hair turned out to be male. And like most young males, he probably desired to have a girl and started going into villages, but he was, I'm sure, rejected.
What does this discovery mean to Honduras and also to Central America?
Well, I think it means a lot to Honduras and actually the whole world. When we found it, there were a couple of things that made it special. First, we were the first ones to use LIDAR, not the first ones to use LIDAR in general, but to use it purely as a tool of discovery in an unknown area. It had been used before, which is how I heard about it, on existing Maya sites in Belize, where they wanted to expand to see if they could see anything else in the surrounding terrain. But no one had ever gone into unknown triple canopy where you're not really sure if there's anything even there. No one had done that. And even the LIDAR engineers said it probably won't work. But I said, if I pay you, will you try? And of course they said, yeah, we'll try. And it worked great. And now everyone's doing it all over the world, and especially in Central America, they're making great discoveries. So that was a good thing. It changed the world in that way. Secondly, for Honduras, it gave the Hondurans something to be proud of about their heritage. People had no idea exactly what was going on in Mosquitia in ancient times. They knew that people lived there and things were going on, but they didn't know that much about it because it's so difficult to go work there. So in the words of the Honduran archaeologist, the head Honduran archaeologist in 2015, when he was uncovering stuff, he said, what we know about this culture is essentially nothing. And we have that on video. So this was an unknown culture, and they were very eager to determine who were these people, where'd they come from, who did they interface with? Did they interface with the Maya? Most likely at some point in time. We don't really know, and that's all the mystery that's being found out. So that's a good thing for them to know. And thirdly, spending a lot of time in the Mosquitia, we realized it was a very special place. The animals were not afraid of us. We'd set up our camp, and all the animals would wander through at night like we were just a tree. Nobody really recognized us. So what does that tell you? That tells you there's no hunting pressure there. People are not going in there and decimating the wildlife, at least not for a long time. So we then commissioned Conservation International, which is a major NGO in conservation, and they sent about, 12 or 14 wildlife biologists, botanists, all kinds of people from Central America and the United States to study. They spent, I think, about 3 weeks there, and they issued a 200-page report, which is fantastic. And they said, this is the most important wildlife corridor between North and South America. There are so many species of life here. Species we weren't even aware of and species we thought were extinct are doing very, very well. So Honduras now knew that it had a very special ecosystem, and people should be proud of that. And of course, it then required them to try and take care of it.
What do you say to critics who downplayed your discovery or your method? Because there were, I mean, despite the fact that it's
Oh, yeah.
extraordinary, people were like, and he shouldn't have done that. They should have left it alone. Blah blah blah. What do you say to those guys?
Well, we had many an argument about it. I stayed out of the argument personally because I was arguing with a group of academics. I'm not an academic, so they could certainly write rings around me. But I employed 12 PhDs, and I let them do the battle. And in the end, I believe they won. I think it was essentially, first of all, I'm not a professional archaeologist. So they're going, what can I know? What can I do? I think they were jealous that I came up with an idea. I pulled together a team, and it worked. And they were sitting there doing other stuff, and how come they weren't involved? That's personally what I think. But in the end, we were vindicated. And that's the end of the story, really. I mean, there'll probably be some people always argue and complain about it, but people do that about everything.
There's a long history of people saying, "No, that's a useless thing," or "Let's not do that," or "I didn't get credit for it, so therefore it doesn't exist." And then eventually they will take credit for it after they get rid of the people who've actually done it. But can't do that today. What
No.
did the jungle? What did the jungle teach you about yourself? And was there a moment where you thought, "You know what? I'm done with this. I'm going to walk away. It's just too much."
Well, there were plenty of moments over 20 some odd years that I said, forget it. This is not happening. In fact, my wife used to tell me she would divorce me if I ever mentioned the lost city or Honduras again. Of course, until I found it, and then she was really championing it. But it certainly taught me the importance of persistence. And if you feel strongly and your gut tells you you're right, believe in yourself and don't let others dissuade you. And if you keep on plugging away, even if it takes 20 years, you can make a dream come true. And I had failures along the way. Trust me, there were plenty of them. And plenty of discouraging times trying to raise the money, trying to get permissions, a lot of obstacles. But I just kept on blindly plugging away. And it happened. I'm sure there's a little bit of luck involved.
You risked your health and your reputation. Why? What made it worth it? What, in your opinion, said keep going?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And maybe this goes a little bit to like when people are into wellness now. I know they're having this wellness week at the Grand Roatan. It's sort of a mental state where you just believe in yourself and believe in your place and what you're doing. and you just don't get dissuaded. I noticed in the jungle, I was very observant of what was going on, the proliferation of different life forms and the intelligence within all the creatures that live there. And I would marvel, like, how did this happen? Very spiritual in a way. I mean, I have a very logical, scientific mind, so I'm not really a religious person, but I am very spiritual, and that really got reinforced being there in the jungle and seeing what happened. And in fact, we would joke amongst all of us, including all the scientists, that the monkey god was looking after us. We would just jokingly say that, because many things would happen that would just put us in the right position at the right time. And I wonder to this day, how did that happen? You know, was something guiding us, or was it not? Or just pure luck? I don't know. But it does happen. In fact, right now I'm in Tella visiting some people, and we've had some very fortunate things happen, and we blame it on, we say the monkey god's looking after us.
You mentioned something that I have a bunch of history dealing with indigenous Americans. My background, my family was Cherokee Indian, and though I'm far removed from that, some of the people that I know, like in the San Pasqual Band of Indians in California, they have a different, they have a different upbringing because they were aware of some of elders that could say, this is a different world. It's not black and white. It's all together. The spiritual part of the world is existing with the physical part of the world. And that was a mentality of indigenous people. Did you get sense of that?
Well, there weren't any indigenous people living in the jungle where we were. We did employ quite a few, and I could talk to them to a bit. But I can say that all of us that were there, we had some kind of spiritual feeling, maybe not in the traditional sense, and I could certainly understand it because we observed things happening in the nature around us that almost defy explanation. I became very strongly opinionated that, we need to keep some of these areas, allow them to let nature take its course, because I believe after this experience that nature actually has the answer to every problem we will ever have as humans. I mean, we are a part of nature ourselves. Nature's been dealing with this since time began, and it's figured out solutions, both, that scientists will eventually figure out how it's doing it. But it's right now beyond a lot of our understanding. But the answers are there.
What comes next for the site? Preservation, tourism, what are the ethical dilemmas that now that the city's no longer lost?
Well, it really, one can argue semantically if it was ever really lost, because obviously people lived there a long time ago. And the local indigenous people had rumors of it. Some claimed they knew where it was. Others said, we never saw it. In fact, the cacique, we brought him out. He's the head of the Pesh. He cried when he came out. He said, I'd heard of this place, but I never saw it. So he was thrilled. And they blessed it. They gave it a new name or something. But what's next is the Honduran government back in 2015, actually back in 2012 when we first found it, they called it they made it a reserve. The Mosquitia Natural Patrimonial Heritage Area or something like that. But that's only on paper, it's not in practicality. And in 2015, the government actually set up a program, and we set up a foundation to try and do conservation of the area. And we also started doing archaeology, which helped funding from National Geographic. So everything was actually going really well in a good direction until COVID. When COVID came and the world fell apart, so did all the efforts there. And it's never really recovered. One of the reasons I'm in Honduras right now is I'm hoping that perhaps the current regime or whoever is the regime after the upcoming elections would like to reinstate some of that work, because I think that we've taken a step backwards when nothing has happened.
Right. All right. If someone listening to us has felt drawn to lost legends and ancient mysteries, and like you have this desire to pursue them, what advice would you give them?
Well, I would say do a lot of homework, do whatever research you can. People think I just went in the LIDAR plane and boom, we found it. Well, to a degree you can do that today. You have enough money, you can fly around and get LIDAR data, and maybe you get lucky and you find something, then you got to go there. Well, you have to work with governments, you got to work with local people. You also have to do your historical research, because that helps pinpoint where you're going and what you're finding. You just can't, it's not recommended that you just haphazardly go, and be persistent. Don't give up. If you think it's there, keep looking.
One final question. What made you say, we have to find this? Was it the adventure? Was it your ego? Was it something you wanted to leave behind? You're a filmmaker by trade. And so you've interviewed people that are very successful and that have tried things like this, I'm sure. What was it that kept you going?
Well, I would say it's my innate curiosity. I have a degree in the geosciences. I was a minor in archaeology. So I always liked this stuff. All right. And a lot in my television career was doing a lot of adventure filming or science and stuff. And I had a position in life where I could follow that passion. And that's really just my own curiosity. I said, I got to solve this mystery. I'm so curious, nothing's going to get in my way. And that's really it. It's not about ego. It's not about making a mark for myself. All that, I made a mark myself because it was successful and it got a lot of attention. But I did it just because internally I wanted to know the answer. And I believe that some of us are born with that kind of curiosity and that kind of drive, and some aren't. Just some people like to do different things. This is what I think I was born to do, this kind of stuff. That's what happened.
Steve Elkins is going to be at the Kimpton Grand Roatan for part of Wellness Week on Saturday night. He'll be talking. There are still available spaces for it, but you do need to reserve before it's gone. Steve, a pleasure meeting you here. I'll see you on Saturday night. Thanks for coming on with us.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Keith. Look forward to maybe meeting you in person this weekend.